Hey there, you're watching Book Demystified, and I'm so glad you're here. Today we're diving into The Budgeting Habit by S.J. Scott, and trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. Picture this. You're standing in Target, holding that cute throw pillow you absolutely don't need, and your brain is having a full-on wrestling match. One side screams, "Treat yourself, you worked hard this week," while the other whispers, "Remember your savings goals?" Sound familiar? If you're nodding right now, you're definitely not alone. Millions of Americans are stuck in this exact same cycle, watching their paychecks disappear faster than free samples at Costco, wondering why budgeting feels impossible, even though they know it's the key to financial freedom. Here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. What if I told you that budgeting doesn't have to be this massive, overwhelming project that requires spreadsheets, calculators, and the discipline of a monk? What if it could become as automatic as brushing your teeth or checking your phone the moment you wake up? S.J. Scott has cracked the code on something most financial experts completely miss, and by the end of this video, you'll have a toolkit of simple daily habits that can transform your relationship with money forever. Let's start with something that might surprise you. Scott opens this book by admitting he used to be terrible with money. I'm talking maxed out credit cards, living paycheck to paycheck, and that sinking feeling every time he opened his bank account. But here's what changed everything for him, and this is where it gets interesting. He realized that budgeting isn't really about math or willpower, it's about psychology and systems. Think about it like this. You don't wake up every morning and consciously decide to brush your teeth. You just do it because it's become an automatic habit. Scott discovered that the same principle applies to managing money, but most people approach budgeting like it's some kind of punishment instead of a habit they can build systematically. The first major insight Scott shares is what he calls the budgeting paradox. Here's how it works. The harder you try to stick to a traditional budget, the more likely you are to fail spectacularly. It's like trying to hold your breath underwater. The more effort you put into it, the more your brain rebels against it. Traditional budgets fail because they rely on constant decision-making and willpower, which are finite resources. Every time you have to consciously think about whether you can afford something, you're draining your mental energy. By the end of the day, when you're tired and stressed, your willpower is completely depleted, and that's when you make the impulse purchases that destroy your budget. Scott introduces what he calls the micro habits for budgeting. These are tiny actions that take less than 2 minutes, but compound over time into massive financial changes. One of his favorite examples is the receipt ritual. Instead of stuffing receipts into your pocket or letting them pile up in your car, you take 30 seconds to categorize each purchase the moment you get home. Groceries go in one pile, entertainment in another, gas in a third. It sounds almost ridiculously simple, but here's the magic. After just 2 weeks of this habit, you start to see patterns in your spending that were completely invisible before. You realize you're spending $60 a month on coffee shop visits, or that your quick trips to the grocery store are adding up to hundreds of dollars extra because you keep forgetting what you already have at home. Another micro habit that Scott swears by is what he calls the morning money check. Before you even get out of bed, you spend 60 seconds checking 3 things: your checking account balance, any transactions from yesterday, and your progress toward your monthly savings goal. This isn't about obsessing over every penny. It's about creating awareness and making money management a natural part of your daily routine. Scott compares it to stepping on a scale when you're trying to lose weight. The scale itself doesn't make you lose weight, but the daily awareness creates a psychological shift that influences your decisions throughout the day. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful concepts in the book, the spending speed bump. Scott noticed he had his worst financial decisions when he was moving too fast. He'd be rushing through Target, grab something he thought he needed, and buy it without really thinking. Sound familiar? The spending speed bump is a simple habit that forces you to slow down before any purchase over $20. Here's how it works. Before you buy anything that costs more than $20, you have to do 3 things. First, take a photo of the item with your phone. Second, walk away from it and do something else in the store for 10 minutes. Third, ask yourself one simple question. If I don't buy this today, will I remember wanting it next week? This habit alone has saved Scott's readers thousands of dollars because it eliminates impulse purchases while still allowing you to buy things you genuinely need and want.
Scott also tackles one of the biggest budgeting mistakes Americans make, trying to cut everything at once. He calls this the financial diet mentality, and it's just as doomed to fail as extreme dieting. Instead, he recommends what he calls sequential habit stacking. You master one small financial habit before adding another. Maybe you start with tracking your coffee purchases for 2 weeks. Once that becomes automatic, you add the receipt ritual. Once that's solid, you implement the morning money check. This approach works because your brain can only handle so much change at once. When you try to overhaul your entire financial life overnight, you overwhelm your capacity for change and end up abandoning everything. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates this principle. Scott tells us about a reader named Jennifer who was drowning in credit card debt and felt completely overwhelmed by her finances. Instead of trying to create a complex budget system, she started with just one habit. Every time she bought something with her credit card, she immediately transferred that same amount from her checking account to her savings account. It sounds weird, right? But here's what happened. Within a month, Jennifer became hyper-aware of every credit card purchase because each one required this extra step. Her credit card spending dropped by 40% without her consciously trying to cut back. The habit created awareness, and awareness naturally led to better decisions. The book dives deep into what Scott calls environmental design for budgeting. This is about setting up your physical and digital environment to make good financial decisions easier and bad ones harder. For example, instead of keeping your credit cards in your wallet where they're easily accessible, you put them in a drawer at home. This doesn't prevent you from using them, but it creates just enough friction that you have to be intentional about credit card purchases. Scott also recommends using the envelope method, but with a modern twist. Instead of using actual cash envelopes, you set up multiple checking accounts for different spending categories. You have one account for groceries, one for entertainment, one for gas, and so on. Your paycheck gets automatically divided between these accounts, and when an account is empty, you're done spending in that category for the month. This approach works because your brain can only handle so much change at once. When you try to overhaul your entire financial life overnight, you overwhelm your capacity for change and end up abandoning everything. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates this principle. Scott tells us about a reader named Jennifer who was drowning in credit card debt and felt completely overwhelmed by her finances. Instead of trying to create a complex budget system, she started with just one habit. Every time she bought something with her credit card, she immediately transferred that same amount from her checking account to her savings account. It sounds weird, right? But here's what happened. Within a month, Jennifer became hyper-aware of every credit card purchase because each one required this extra step. Her credit card spending dropped by 40% without her consciously trying to cut back. The habit created awareness, and awareness naturally led to better decisions. The book dives deep into what Scott calls environmental design for budgeting. This is about setting up your physical and digital environment to make good financial decisions easier and bad ones harder. For example, instead of keeping your credit cards in your wallet where they're easily accessible, you put them in a drawer at home. This doesn't prevent you from using them, but it creates just enough friction that you have to be intentional about credit card purchases. Scott also recommends using the envelope method, but with a modern twist. Instead of using actual cash envelopes, you set up multiple checking accounts for different spending categories. You have one account for groceries, one for entertainment, one for gas, and so on. Your paycheck gets automatically divided between these accounts, and when an account is empty, you're done spending in that category for the month. One of my favorite concepts from the book is what Scott calls the abundance mindset shift. Most budgeting advice focuses on restriction and deprivation, which creates a scarcity mindset that actually makes you want to spend more. It's like being told you can't think about a pink elephant. The more you focus on what you can't have, the more you want it. Instead, Scott flips this on its head by focusing on abundance and choice. Instead of saying, "I can't afford this," you say, "I'm choosing to spend my money on my savings goal instead." It's a subtle shift in language, but it completely changes how you feel about budgeting. You're not depriving yourself. You're making an empowered choice about your priorities. Scott also addresses one of the biggest budgeting challenges, dealing with irregular income. If you're freelancing, working gig jobs, or earning commission, traditional budgeting advice doesn't really apply to you. Scott introduces what he calls buffer budgeting.
Instead of budgeting based on what you earned last month, you calculate your absolute minimum monthly expenses and make sure you always have at least 3 months of that amount in your checking account. Any income above that amount gets allocated to your various goals and spending categories. This system gives you the stability of a regular paycheck even when your income fluctuates wildly. Hey, if you're enjoying this and love free book summaries that respect your time and brain, there are a few simple ways to support us. You can hit that subscribe button, become a channel member, or grab the book via our link in the description. And if you're feeling generous, we've also added a PayPal and UPI tip link. Every bit of support helps us keep going. Let's talk about something Scott calls the compound effect of small decisions. Most people think budgeting is about big, dramatic changes, cutting out your morning coffee, canceling all your subscriptions, never eating out again. But Scott shows us that tiny, almost insignificant changes can have massive long-term impacts. He shares the story of a couple who decided to pack lunch 3 days a week instead of buying it. That's it. They still bought lunch twice a week, but they packed it 3 times. This small change saved them about $45 per week, which doesn't sound like much, but when they put that $45 into an investment account every week, it grew to over $12,000 in just 2 years. They barely noticed the change in their daily routine, but it created real wealth over time.
Scott introduces a fascinating concept called decision fatigue recovery. You know that feeling when you've made too many decisions in a day and your brain just wants to shut down? That's decision fatigue, and it's one of the biggest enemies of good budgeting. Scott's solution is brilliant in its simplicity. Automate as many financial decisions as possible so your willpower can focus on the decisions that really matter. He recommends setting up automatic transfers for all your savings goals, automatic bill pay for all your fixed expenses, and predetermined spending limits for discretionary categories. The goal is to reduce the number of financial decisions you have to make each day, which preserves your mental energy for more important choices. One of the most powerful sections of the book deals with what Scott calls social spending pressure. Let's be real. A huge chunk of our spending is driven by social situations. Your friends want to go to that expensive restaurant. Your coworkers are planning a group vacation. Your family expects expensive gifts during the holidays. Scott doesn't suggest becoming a hermit or disappointing everyone you care about. Instead, he provides scripts and strategies for navigating social spending without sacrificing your financial goals. For example, when friends invite you to an expensive dinner, instead of making up an excuse or just saying no, you could say something like, "That place looks amazing, but I'm trying to stick to my budget this month. What if we did happy hour appetizers there instead? Or I could host dinner at my place next weekend." You're being honest about your constraints while offering alternatives that keep you connected to your social circle. The book also tackles the psychology of what Scott calls lifestyle inflation creep. This is when your spending gradually increases to match your income increases, leaving you with the same financial stress, even though you're making more money. Scott's solution is the 50-50 rule. Whenever you get a raise or increase your income, automatically save 50% of the increase and use the other 50% to improve your lifestyle. This way, you get to enjoy the benefits of earning more while still building wealth for the future. It's a balanced approach that prevents both lifestyle inflation and the resentment that can come from saving every penny of your raise. Scott shares a powerful story about a reader named Marcus who used this principle when he got a promotion that increased his salary by $800 per month. Instead of letting his spending naturally expand to absorb the extra income, Marcus automatically set up a transfer of $400 to his investment account and allowed himself to spend the other $400 on lifestyle improvements. Within 3 years, that automatic $400 investment had grown to over $20,000, and Marcus barely missed the money because he never got used to having it in his spending budget. Another crucial concept Scott explores is the emergency fund psychology. Most financial experts tell you to save 3 to 6 months of expenses in an emergency fund, but they don't talk about the psychological impact of that advice. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, the idea of saving $15,000 or $20,000 can feel so overwhelming that they never start at all. Scott breaks this down into what he calls emergency fund milestones. Instead of focusing on the massive end goal, you celebrate smaller wins along the way. Your first milestone is $500. That's enough to handle most minor emergencies like a car repair or medical copay. Your second milestone is $1,000, which can handle bigger emergencies. Your third milestone is 1 month of expenses, and so on. Each milestone feels achievable and gives you a psychological win that motivates you to keep going. Scott also addresses something most budgeting books ignore, the emotional side of money management. He talks about financial shame spirals, those moments when you've overspent or made a financial mistake and you feel so guilty that you just give up on budgeting altogether. It's like breaking your diet with a cookie, then deciding to eat the whole package because you've already ruined everything. Scott's approach to this is what he calls the reset ritual. When you make a financial mistake, instead of wallowing in guilt or abandoning your budget, you acknowledge what happened, figure out what led to the mistake, adjust your system to prevent it from happening again, and then immediately get back on track. No drama, no self-flagellation, just learning and moving forward. Let me tell you about one of the most practical tools in the book, the weekly money day. Scott recommends setting aside 30 minutes every week to review your finances, but he makes it enjoyable instead of stressful. You pick a consistent time, maybe Sunday morning with your coffee, and you make it pleasant. Maybe you play your favorite music or treat yourself to a fancy coffee while you do it. During this time, you review your spending from the past week, check your progress toward your goals, and plan for any unusual expenses coming up. The key is consistency and making it feel like self-care rather than a chore.
Scott introduces a game-changing concept called value-based budgeting. Instead of focusing on arbitrary categories like entertainment or miscellaneous, you align your spending with your actual values and priorities. For example, if family time is one of your core values, you budget more generously for family activities and experiences. If health is a priority, you don't feel guilty about spending money on a gym membership or organic groceries. If career development matters to you, you budget for courses, books, and networking events. This approach eliminates the guilt and internal conflict that comes with traditional budgeting because every spending decision is aligned with what you actually care about. The book also covers what Scott calls seasonal spending rhythms. Most people budget as if their expenses are the same every month, but that's not realistic. December is going to cost more than February because of holiday spending. Summer might cost more because of vacations and higher utility bills. Instead of being surprised by these predictable variations, Scott recommends creating seasonal spending plans. You look at the past year and identify the months when you typically spend more. Then you save extra money in the low-spending months to cover the high-spending months. This eliminates the credit card debt cycle that happens when people can't afford their predictable seasonal expenses. One of my favorite strategies Scott shares is called the Spending Satisfaction Audit. Every month, you look back at your purchases and rate how satisfied you are with each one on a scale of 1 to 10. The goal isn't to judge yourself, but to identify patterns. You might discover that you consistently rate restaurant meals as 8 or 9 out of 10 for satisfaction, but impulse purchases at Target usually rate as 3 or 4 out of 10. This data helps you make better spending decisions in the future. You can spend more confidently on things that bring you high satisfaction and be more cautious about purchases that historically leave you feeling disappointed. Scott also tackles the challenge of budgeting as a couple. Money is one of the biggest sources of conflict in relationships, but it doesn't have to be. Scott recommends what he calls the 3-account system for couples. You have a joint account for shared expenses like rent, groceries, and utilities. Each person also has their own individual account for personal spending that they can use however they want without judgment or discussion. This system eliminates most money fights because it clearly defines what's shared and what's individual. The key is agreeing on how much money goes into each account and being transparent about the shared expenses. The book includes a fascinating section on what Scott calls the psychology of found money. You know that feeling when you find $20 in an old jacket or get an unexpected tax refund?
Most people treat found money differently than earned money, often spending it more carelessly. Scott suggests creating a found money protocol, where you decide in advance how you'll handle unexpected income. Maybe 50% goes to savings, 25% goes to debt payment, and 25% is fun money you can spend however you want. Having a plan eliminates the tendency to blow unexpected money on impulse purchases. Scott addresses one of the most common budgeting mistakes: underestimating irregular expenses. Things like car maintenance, annual insurance premiums, holiday gifts, and home repairs don't happen every month, but they're completely predictable over the course of a year. Most people treat these expenses like emergencies, but Scott shows you how to budget for them systematically. You add up all your irregular expenses for the year, divide by 12, and set aside that amount every month in a separate account. When your car needs new tires or your insurance premium is due, the money is already there waiting for you.
Another powerful concept from the book is the minimum effective dose for budgeting. Just like you don't need to spend 3 hours at the gym to get fit, you don't need to spend hours every week managing your budget to get your finances on track. Scott identifies the minimum amount of time and energy required to maintain good financial habits. For most people, it's about 15 minutes per day and 30 minutes per week. The daily 15 minutes covers things like tracking expenses and checking account balances. The weekly 30 minutes is for reviewing your progress and planning ahead. That's it. Any more than that, and you risk burning out and abandoning the system altogether. Scott also explores what he calls the identity shift required for successful budgeting. Most people think of themselves as bad with money or not a budgeting person, and this identity becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Scott shows you how to gradually shift your identity from someone who struggles with money to someone who makes intentional financial decisions. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. It's about taking small actions that align with the financial identity you want to develop and letting those actions gradually change how you see yourself. Let me share one more powerful story from the book. Scott tells us about a reader named Sarah, who was a single mom struggling to make ends meet on a teacher's salary. She felt like budgeting was impossible because her income was so tight that there was no room for error. Scott helped her implement what he calls micro-margin budgeting. Instead of trying to cut big expenses she couldn't control, Sarah focused on creating tiny margins throughout her budget. She switched to a cheaper phone plan and saved $15 per month. She started meal planning and reduced her grocery bill by $25 per month. She negotiated her car insurance and saved $12 per month. None of these changes felt significant on their own, but together they created $52 per month in breathing room. That small margin allowed her to start building an emergency fund, which reduced her financial stress and gave her the confidence to look for additional income opportunities. The final section of the book deals with what Scott calls financial habit maintenance. Building good budgeting habits is one thing, but maintaining them over the long term is another challenge entirely. Scott provides strategies for staying motivated when the initial excitement wears off, dealing with setbacks without giving up entirely, and continuously improving your system as your life changes. The key insight is that budgeting isn't a destination you reach, it's a skill you develop and refine over time. Scott emphasizes that the goal of budgeting isn't to restrict your life or eliminate all fun spending. The goal is to make sure your money is being used intentionally to create the life you actually want. When your spending aligns with your values and priorities, budgeting feels empowering rather than restrictive. You're not depriving yourself. You're investing in your future self and the experiences that matter most to you. As we wrap up, here's the key takeaway that ties everything together. Budgeting doesn't have to be complicated, time-consuming, or painful. The most effective budgeting systems are built on simple daily habits that become automatic over time. Start with just one small habit, master it completely, then add another. Focus on progress, not perfection. Celebrate small wins along the way.
And remember that every financial decision is an opportunity to move closer or further away from the life you want to create. The choice is always yours, but now you have the tools to make that choice consciously and consistently. Your future self is going to thank you for starting today, even if you start small, because sometimes the smallest changes create the biggest transformations, and your financial transformation starts with a single habit repeated daily until it becomes as natural as breathing.